people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. An unexpected bit of news as it pertains to WBA Super Flyweight champion Jezine Artiga, who's set to be returning to action next month on the 13th in what is not an MVP show, even though MVP signed her.
Oh,
She's already made her MVP debut, so I was surprised to see that she would be boxing on a Box Lab promotion and not an MVP promotion. Does this mean that it was a one and done with MVP and they're not going to use her? Not necessarily. It could be that her contract is structured in such a way that she can box on other platforms under other promotions if opportunities present themselves. She might still be with MVP, sporting a professional record of 14 wins with no losses and 1 draw, 7 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 15 professional bouts. She's set to be facing Mexico's own Stephanie Silva in what doesn't look to be a tune-up fight, not based on the opponent. Stephanie Silva sports a professional record of 10 wins with 1 loss and no draws, no recorded knockouts, having never been knocked out in 11 professional bouts. That's not a journeywoman's record. That's not a gatekeeper's record. 10-1. Last in action in June of this year opposite the ring, former EBU champion Mary Romero, who Stephanie decisioned over 10 rounds. Currently on a 2-fight winning streak after having dropped a decision to IBF champion Irma Garcia in November of 2023. And so she fought once last year in June, fought again this year in June, and this fight with Jezine is set to be her second fight of this calendar year. Thus, she has no ring rust to shake off. Notable wins over the very tough and durable Melis Gengloff and the previously mentioned Mary Romero. With only 1 recorded loss to Irma Garcia, Stephanie is not a gatekeeper. She's not a journeywoman. Not yet. Doesn't look like it. She also has 3 recorded wins over 3 unbeaten fighters. Jezine, the reigning WBA champion, will be the next unbeaten fighter that she faces. Jezine saw action 2 times this year, once in March, then again in August, in what was her MVP debut opposite the ring Australia's own Lynn Sandstorm, who she stopped in the 3rd round of a contest scheduled for 10. Both fighters have seen action this year, and thus neither one of them has any ring rust that they need to shake off. And I reiterate, this doesn't look like a tune-up fight. This doesn't look like a gimme. The super flyweight division is coming alive, as this weekend, reigning WBO super flyweight champion Mizuki Hiruta is set to defend her title on the West Coast. Not that far off, the vacant WBC title will be on the line in the Adelaida Ruiz versus Alexis Kubicki fight, and next month, Jezine will return to action in defense of her WBA title. How soon can we expect unification matches to happen? It's hard to say, because even though Mizuki Hiruta is with Tom Loeffler's 360 Promotions, I don't know that Tom has it in the budget to bring another champion over to his platform to box Mizuki. IBF champion Irma Garcia is not with a major promoter. Neither is Alexis Kubicki or Adelaida Ruiz, the winner of their fight. Whoever it is, they're not with a major promoter either. The only one that is Jezine Artiga, provided that she's still with MVP. And MVP more than has it in the budget to make a unification match between Jezine and any one of these other champions. The problem is, one or some of them might beat her. So how soon we can expect unification matches all depends on the situation between Jezine MVP and how soon she wants to have one after this Stephanie Silva fight if she wins, and she already has a mandatory in the queue in Natalie Delgado, WBA interim champion. On that premise, it's hard to get a fix on how soon we can expect unification matches to happen at Superfly. I expect that at least one will occur in the coming calendar year.
Yeah, at least one.
That's the direction things seem to be going in the super flyweight division. The champions are getting active.
You know, I don't think they're going to recreate what they've done in UFC and boxing. I think they are. You know, I don't know whether.
Why don't you think?
I think it's a sport that's got hundreds of years of heritage. Yeah. It's had huge investment years after year. You know, whether it was Waddell and Reed with PBC, whether it was the Triller guys pumping a few $100 million in. You know, DAZN obviously invested huge in it. You know, you've got His Excellency right now investing massive money into the sport of boxing. But there's been people come and go in the sport over the years because boxing is this sexy sport with the history. I think they'll create a tremendous brand because that's what they do. They've done it with Power Slap, whether you like it or not. You know, people are talking about it. So they'll create a tremendous brand, but I don't believe they'll be able to take over the sport because you've got so many people already in the sport and who are successful, who have got huge brands, who have got rights deals, broadcasters behind them. And I think the fighter relationship's very different. You know, in UFC, they're essentially, the brand is bigger than the athletes. That's the truth of it, for the most part, outside of maybe a Conor McGregor or, you know, one or two. In boxing, without the athletes, your brand doesn't mean too much. You can have a rights deal, you can have all of this, but you need the athletes to be on side. And I think that's going to be hard for them to transition the power. You know, from in UFC being able to say, you're fighting on this date, you're wearing these gloves, these are your sponsors, yada, 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 to actually, I'm in charge here. I'm the fighter and I'm in charge. And that's what it is in boxing.
That's not going to happen at Zuffa. And I think that's the whole point of them doing things differently than everybody else in the industry. Zuffa will exist in a bubble unto itself. Doesn't operate the way that regular boxing operates. They're only going to work with a certain grade of fighter, a certain tier. In many ways, that could be what limits their success. They can be successful, though only up until a certain point, because if you don't have those big names, you don't get that big attention.
The big fights.
Frank basically echoed everything I've been saying here on the channel. At the UFC brand is bigger than the individual fighter, whereas in boxing, the boxers aspire to be bigger than boxing, bigger than the sport itself, to where they do whatever they want. Now, very few of them make it to that point, but still, that's what many boxers aspire to. And there's no room for those kinds of attitudes at Zuffa. And so what might limit their success might also be what keeps them afloat, if that makes sense. Because without the pretty little princesses and all of their prima donna demands, you don't end up going over budget. You don't end up overspending when there's a cap on it. And when the brand itself, not the boxer, but the brand, gets those other arms of revenue, the corporate sponsorships, the brand deals, that operates as a safety net that can keep the brand afloat, because it's going to the brand and not the boxer. There's going to be some boxers that really don't like that, and they will continue to operate outside of Zuffa's borders, but the ones that do, that's what they're going to be subject to. So how can Zuffa be successful on that premise? The short answer is, so long as the fights are good, and they're entertaining and you're doing fights on a regular schedule, which they plan on doing, one card every month, all 12 months of the calendar year, on a major platform like Paramount, and with the megaphone that Zuffa Boxing is going to have, they will be able to advertise their fights and raise awareness. I think sheer curiosity will be enough to draw boxing fans to the Zuffa brand, though whether or not they stay is contingent upon how good the fights are. If you got two guys in there beating the hell out of each other, where you can provide Gaddy versus Ward style fights
at a nominal price, nominal at least compared to what DAZN is charging.
Because that's the other thing, subscription costs. A Paramount Plus subscription costs you less than a DAZN subscription. Tack on the pay-per-views.
Oh, forget it.
Paramount Plus subscription is going to seem like a drop in the bucket compared to what it costs you to watch boxing on DAZN. So they've got that working for them, and I reiterate, if they can provide Gaddy versus Ward style fights for a fraction of the cost, highlight real knockouts, just
Entertainment, blood and guts. What draws people to combat sports?
they can be successful unto themselves without having to work with anybody else. Successful to the degree that Power Slap has been successful, maybe more. You know, a lot of people already have Paramount Plus subscriptions.
79.1 million.
Understand that that is a lot of people that are already subscribed to that platform that you can advertise those fights to.
They can be successful.
It can work, and for it to work, it needs to be a deviation from the norm. It does need to be different in its own way. What you're used to seeing in regular boxing that chaps your ass and pisses you off.
Zuffa can't get caught up in any of that, and they're not going to, since they're not working with alphabet organizations and all of their chicanery, favoritism.
The fighters they work with, because they're of a certain tier, aren't going to have the highfalutin demands that prevent a lot of fights from happening in regular boxing. Zuffa's boxing might be a bit more consistent, and I could see fans liking that.
Structure breeds consistency, where boxing is often a sport that is consistently inconsistent.
Zuffa can be different because it's more structured than what you see in regular boxing, albeit on a much smaller scale. Some people might like that it has structure, that it has consistency. They can be successful, just like Frank Smith said. Though what else he said? That they won't take over boxing because there are too many established relationships and brands, promoters that are having their own success. Zuffa won't run them out of boxing, which is what I've been telling you. In spite of all the money and resources they have behind them, boxing is a bit too big for them to monopolize it.
We were after Colin Smith a little bit more because he was going to bring me, with the victory with him, he'd bring me another interim title. So that'd put me in an even closer position to find the champion. So, but like I said, after this fight, everything goes good. We're gonna get this victory, and then we're probably gonna get Callum next.
Heard that from the horse's mouth, from David Benavidez himself. If he is successful this weekend, he will face former super middleweight champion Callum Smith immediately after. In the coming calendar year, am I against this fight?
No, I'm not.
Now, you may be thinking to yourself, why would he go after Callum next instead of Dmitry Bivol? It's because Dmitry is recovering from back surgery, from a herniated disc, and in all likelihood, his next fight is going to be an easy one, a gimme fight to test out that back.
What happened to him fighting Artur?
Well, be honest with yourself. Fighting Callum Smith is a lot more safe than fighting Artur Beterbiev. We don't know what's going on with Artur. All we know is that he's broken away from Top Rank. He's a network and promotional free agent, and reports indicate he's been talking to Umar Kremlev and the people at the IBA. He may end up going to them and fighting for them.
You don't know right now. And you know that he was supposed to be boxing on this weekend show, on the undercard, and for whatever reason, that fight got scrapped.
That David Benavidez is not boxing Artur Beterbiev after this weekend comes as no surprise to me, because I said that I was skeptical, and I said that he wouldn't. But am I okay with a Callum Smith fight in its place? Yes, I am okay with that fight, because Callum Smith is a top contender, a former super middleweight champion like David was a super middleweight champion. That was a fight I would have liked to have seen then. And given how they've both been looking in their fights, I wouldn't mind seeing it now. Is it as good as the Beterbiev fight?
No.
No, it's not. It's not. But I'll take it. I'll take it. The only drawback with targeting Callum is Callum is currently enthralled in negotiations for what's supposed to be a David Morrell fight. There was supposed to be a purse bid this week that got postponed, pushed out to next Tuesday.
A mandated defense of Callum Smith's WBO interim title against Cuba's own David Morrell, who's coming off that controversial win over Imam Katayev.
The WBO ordered this fight, and if Callum wants to keep that interim title, he has to go through with it. But If he already has a direct shot at David Benavidez for his full WBC title, you know that he might bail on this thing. Why roll the dice with David Morrell in defense of a secondary title when you can fight for a full one in your next fight?
Why isn't the David Morrell fight done?
I don't know, but the fact that it isn't leads me to believe that maybe Turkey LL Sheik isn't paying for that one. If it's going to a purse bid, if the fight isn't made yet, maybe Turkey's not the one paying for it, so maybe now Callum is thinking, why fight David Morrell for an interim when I can fight David Benavidez for a full title? That's the guy I wanted to fight anyway.
Callum Smith has said it more than once that is the fight that he wants. And if Turkey is paying for that fight, but not paying for this one, Callum is going to go where the money is. There is every possibility that Callum drops the WBO interim title.
It's possible, though also contingent upon what happens this weekend, because what if David loses? What if David loses to Anthony Yarde? What happens then?
Callum targets Anthony Yarde.
Well, he can target him as much as he wants. Is Anthony Yarde going to want to give him the time of day? Is Anthony Yarde going to want to give him an opportunity? If they've already had a dialogue between Callum and David to do a fight next year, but David loses, have they had that same dialogue with Anthony?
It's a lot of moving parts. It's a fluid situation. But I don't mind the idea of David Benavidez versus Callum Smith. That's the bottom line. That if David wins this weekend and he moves into a Callum Smith fight, that is acceptable. Not as good as a Beterbiev fight, but acceptable.
Who wins a fight?
Stylistically, you might have to give the edge to David Benavidez in that one. David Benavidez, a mid-range to inside pressure fighter, combination puncher. We've seen in the past Callum Smith flustered by these kinds of fighters, and John Ryder, Canelo Alvarez.
Fighters who pressured him, closing the distance, crashing the pocket, throwing punches in bunches, being aggressive. That's what David Benavidez is. He's aggressive. An aggressive combination puncher, bigger than both. Bigger than John Ryder, bigger than Canelo, big pressure.
Big problems for Callum Smith if and when the time comes, but of course, this is contingent upon David winning this weekend. I happen to think that stylistically, Anthony Yarde might be a more difficult fight for David than Callum. If he can make it past Yarde, he can beat Callum.
That would improve his chances. That would further solidify his resume, his campaign as a light heavyweight. He would essentially be doing now in the light heavyweight division what I wanted to see from him at super middleweight, and thus, I'm not against the fight. Callum Smith is coming off a great win over a then unbeaten Joshua Buatsi.
He's a top contender.
But you know what else? If Callum Smith doesn't have that fight with David Morrell, if he bails on him for the Benavidez fight, it will have been a long while since Callum's last outing.
The fight with Callum and Joshua was back in February. It's the only fight that Callum's had this entire calendar year.
And so you figure that if David Benavidez takes care of business this weekend, you could probably put a potential Callum Smith fight somewhere out there in February or March. And if it's all the way out there, it will have been a year in between the Buatsi fight and the Benavidez fight. Callum Smith has a penchant for taking more time off than he needs to, not being as active as he can, and that hurts his chances.
I thought that he learned his lesson when he said he was going to try to be more active, but he did this year what he usually does. He fought once, and then we don't see him.
So in a fight with David Benavidez, like him or not, you have to give the edge to David Benavidez. All that remains is for David to make it past Anthony Yarde this weekend, and we'll see if he does.